to AWS DevOps series. Today we are going to cover on IAM and AWS CLI. So this should be a very short session where we are going to understand what is IAM and why it is very much useful. I thought of bringing this session a bit earlier because when I jump into a serverless architecture or any other services a bit deeper, so there are more options related to IAM we need to use. So there it will be a little bit difficult for you to understand the terminologies related to IAM. So I want to complete this IAM session. So this should be a very short session. So it's pretty much simple, and this IAM is pretty much straightforward. And we are going to do a small demo on IAM, and then we are going to configure our AWS CLI, a command line utility, how you can configure and how you can interact with AWS from your command line. So coming back to our session, so this IAM stands for Identity and Access Management. It's nothing but like, for example, if you are owning a particular account, like for example you are having a Gmail account, you will be having the related access for your user account. If you go into settings and provide your whatever the rules you want, how much who can access your G drive and all. In the similar fashion, identity and access management is a central place on AWS where you manage your access to the services or to the users or to the roles. So the key terminologies in IAM is users, roles, policies, and user groups. Okay, so on IAM, the people who are part of that particular organization, or the people who are part of that federal entity, like for example, if you are working for a company, you will be having a domain. So all those domain users can be added to this IAM to the as a part of users. But technically speaking, let us say you are an employee and you are added to a particular AWS account, so then you will be called as a user for that, and your user will be having the necessary access. As of now, we are using Gmail account to log into your AWS management console, then you are accessing the resources. But you can also add some users. Let us say you are a project owner and there are a couple of developers who want to work along with you, but you don't want a full level of privileges you want to give it to them. You only want to limit to the number of services what they are working, and even on the number of services you want to limit only to the specific actions. Like for example, you don't want developers to terminate the EC2 instances. You can fine tune their policies or fine tune their access using IAM. So that's why we have users in which a physical humans or physical users can be added, and you have roles. Roles are nothing but, like for example, you are having a EC2 server and you want to access S3 bucket. In AWS, if you want to access if a service want to access another service, then you need to have a role attached to that particular service. If a user want to access, then you call it as a user policy, and if a role want to access, then we call it as a role policy. Okay, so technically speaking, users or a physical persons who log into the console and gain the access to the AWS management console either from the GUI or from the CLI. But roles are intended to the services present on AWS to interact with other services. And policies are nothing but whatever the permissions we are speaking, the policies, the permissions are written in the form of JSON, and we call that as a policy. Like let us say I want an access to S3, so I'll be writing a policy for accessing the S3, and that policy will be attached either to the user or to the role. If you attach it to the user, a user will be gain the access. But if you attach it to a role, the role which is being assigned attached to the service will be gaining that particular access. And user group itself says that a group of users can be added to a group and policy can be attached to the group. So this is how this AWS IAM and access management works, but we are going to see this in much detail when we log into the console, because getting the things on hands-on will be much more clear. And going forward, most of the sessions we are going to deep dive directly onto the console. We are going to just understand what that particular that service is a little bit, an overview, then we directly jump into the console to do the hands-on. Okay, so this is directly taken from the reference from the doc. You can get it from the PPT. So this is the AWS IAM identity and access management. So there's one more tool for AWS CLI. You can download it from here. So this we are going to see. But before this, let's get our things running for identity and access management and do a small demo on that. Post that, we can have this AWS CLI. So CLI is nothing but a command line interface. Like for example, now you are logging into the AWS management console using what do you say, a GUI or a browser using a URL. But you can also access AWS Management Console via CLI, nothing but via the command line. So that's also there. You can download that with this particular URL. So this is again the download link. You can get it from the Amazon. So these are certain commands that we'll be using, and this access key, secret ID, and region are nothing but the usernames and passwords similar to that AWS will provide to connect to AWS via CLI. Let's see all these things in action. Let's have a quick demo on IAM, and then we can have the CLI running and try to access the services on AWS using this CLI. Because this CLI is very much important, because when you go into the real-time projects or when you are working in the real-time market, people not generally prefer accessing your or setting up the infrastructures or building up applications via GUI. You should start utilizing the CLI commands, or also we generally call it as a Boto3 modules on Python. So there will be a dedicated is a couple of videos only on Python Boto3 AWS modules that I'll be covering after the AWS covering most of the services on AWS. Then I'll be covering the Python Boto3 modules, which is very important when you get into the real time. So you will not be asked to launch an EC2 instance logging into the console. Rather, you will be asked to write a Python function to launch a EC2 instance based on some attributes. So this is how the real-time work goes. So that's we're going to see in action, but let's try to get our understanding on IAM and how to get the CLI access and all via a demo on the AWS console. Let's jump into the console and then we can see it. Okay, so now I have logged into my AWS console. Let's quickly get into IAM. Start typing IAM on the search bar besides the services. Then you can click on IAM. So once you log into IAM, get into this IAM page, you will be having multiple options under access management like user groups, users, roles, policies, identity providers, and account settings. But for now, let's get into the users. I'm trying to create a user so that I can log in rather than my root user. I want to log in with a different user and see how it behaves. So let me create a user. Let me give a user as Manish AWS DevOps Demo. Okay, so I want to give it the provide user access to AWS management console, and also in the user type, try selecting I want to create a IAM user, even though it specify a user in identity center. So this is more related to the SSO authentications that we generally do when we are doing as a part of what do you say, the organizations, and more into a kind of domain based registrations kind of stuff. So you can just skip that, because we are not much interested to create a user on the identity center, because we did not register any identity. So just set to I want to create an IAM user and select the custom password. You can select any custom password like as of your choice. I'm selecting a password of my choice, which will be in this what do you say, the characteristics. So you can just select, and then you can even unselect or select this users must create a new password at next sign in. So I'm just trying to unselect that, or let's select it so that it will show a page where you can ask to set up a new password at the sign in. So I'm just clicking next, and these are the permission options you are going to give that particular user to which services he can access, or the user can access. But I'm not giving any permissions right now. I want you to show how it behaves when a user is not provided any permissions. So I'm just clicking next. So this set boundary permissions is also a set of options that you can provide to a user until what boundary he is permitted, like until what extent he can be permitted. So it's also a policy that we can add. So click on next and just click on create user. Once this successfully creates a user, it will give you the console sign-in links, so console sign-in details. You should use this URL for logging into the console, or you can use the AWS management console and provide the account number while logging in, but its best practice is to use this console sign in URL. So let me copy this and open in a new incognito or new tab or the browser. So let me paste it. So now I'm able to get a URL where I can log in. So if you see here, we have a username and there is a password. So I remember password, I'm not showing it. So if it is loaded with account ID or account alias, because we have used this URL, so it is preloaded with account number. Even you can cross verify this account number with these details, like it is 5638 ending with, so it's 5638. So my username is this and I want to give my password. So just remember my password, so I'm giving it. So you can also give your password what you have set it while creating the user. Okay, so I'm just giving sign in. So if you see here, it is asking to set me a new password during the time of first login. So you need to set it. So ensure you follow the regulations what AWS is asking you to. So I'm just setting my password. So I'll just do a confirm password change. So my password has been changed. Now I will be able to log into AWS console and I'll be able to access the services which are present on AWS. But we will try to understand what actually happens when a new user has been created and access is given for the first time. If you come into this and click on users, user has been created successfully. So let me click on view user. You had downloaded the password, that's fine. So just click continue, and if you click on the users, you see a Manish AWS DevOps demo user has been created, and in this the only policy that has been attached is IAM user change password, because he should be, or this user should be changed at the time of login. There is no other policy attached to this user so that he can access any AWS service. Okay, if you get into here, let me try to access EC2. So if you click on EC2, you will be able to see a lot of API error and error code while checking for a default VPC. So all these errors, this is because, or let us say for example, I want to click on instances running. If you see, and if you click on this instances running URL, you can see that you are not able to list anything out of this. It's saying like you are not authorized to perform these operations. Let me click on instance types. You will be getting the similar thing. You are not authorized to perform this operation. If you click on dashboard, so if you click on this thing, it says that even you are not authorized, or you don't have those permissions. So this says that your user is not permitted to access anything on on EC2. Okay, so like this, so you can just click on this. You're not even authorized any operation on EC2. Or you can just say I'm just checking on Stockholm. But even if you go to US North Virginia region, even if you select that particular region, also you will not be having any relevant access or any access which is not provided on the user when you are creating it. So this says that AWS restricts the users or the permissions to the user based on policies, because we are much interested when you are working on a form, the only access should be given to the user what it is needed. So this is called as least access privilege policy. So when you are going for a certifications, or when you are going for any kind of interviews, so the most important question that you will get is how you are going to give an access to a particular user, what kind of what do you say, the method or what strategy you are going to follow. So we need to say is least access privilege. So this least access privilege term, this term you will see in most of the interview questions, most of the certification questions, and most of the questions where you want to give any kind of written tests or anything. So this is most important. So least access privilege is something we follow. We only give the necessary policies or only needed policies to the user who is not an admin, so that he or she, or it might not affect anything to the system. Okay, so now my what I'm thinking is let me give an access to this Manish AWS DevOps demo user to access EC2. Now I'm not able to authorize any operation, right? So now let me give an access to it. So I'm just getting into the user in the policies. So before that, all the accesses permissions are written in the form of a policy. So let me create a policy and attach it, or else you can attach the existing policy as well. So there are some policies what AWS has provided for us via predefined. Like for example, if you start typing for EC2 and just press enter, you can see Amazon full access is a policy written by AWS by default, stating that if you see a policy is written in the form of a JSON. If you see here, it's a statement stating that action EC2 star. On EC2, I am allowing all operations on all resources. And elastic load balancing, I am allowing everything. CloudWatch, I am allowing everything. Auto scaling. So this is some predefined policy provided by AWS. You can select this policy and directly utilize it, or you can create your own policy. Okay. First, let me what he say is let me have a policy or use a policy that is already available by AWS. So what I will do, I want a EC2 full access, or I want to provide a full access to this user for EC2. So then what I'll do is, you need to get into the user under permissions, click on add permission and add permission. So do not entertain yourselves for doing a create inline policy, because this is not a best practice. Always add permissions via a policy you have written here. Assume there is a policy already written by AWS and you are utilizing that. Next step, we are going to create a custom policy. So click on add permissions. So once you click on add permissions, you will see add a user to a group, or copy permissions, or attach policies directly. So you can click on attach policies directly, and then in this you can select as EC2 and press enter. And then just scroll a little bit right. Then you can see Amazon EC2 full access. I'm going to select this and then click on next. My intention is to have a EC2 full access to this particular user after adding this policy. So this policy has been added. I'm going to the other window where this user is present. Now let me do a refresh, and I'm hoping that this should be having the necessary permissions to the AWS EC2, and I should not see any kind of attribute error or API error. So now it's not an authorization error. You don't have any instances in this region. If you get into the EC2 dashboard like prior, now you will not see that errors, right? API error and all. You're not able to see that errors. You can directly create an instance, and you can directly, let us say for example, in the AMIs, you can get into that and you can do a lot of things. You don't have any images in the region, but let us say quickly, if you can get into security group, and you can see those security groups what you have already created as a part of your demos or as a part of your assignments earlier when we are discussing. So all these stuffs are now you are able to access on EC2 because you have attached this policy. Okay, so now let me get into another service like S3, which we have already seen. So do we think that after adding EC2 permissions, are we gonna get the access to S3 as well? No, right? So we are not going to get the access to S3 if you only add the permissions to EC2. So now my assumption is like, even in the S3 you should not be having any access. If you click on buckets, even you don't, if you see this, you don't have permissions to list buckets. Okay, so now what I want to have is, I only want to have a permission to this user only to list the buckets. That means I want only permission to just see what buckets are there. I don't want this user to have permissions to write into a bucket, delete, or put an action or update a bucket. So I just want to have this S3 list all my buckets operation on this. So what I'll do is, I'll just again get into the user. So now rather than using or rather than attaching permissions directly what AWS has given, I want to customize or tweak my policy. So I'll just create a new policy for my user. Let us say my policy, I want to on the service S3. On the service S3, this is how you need to create via visual. So let's make it a practice of using visual for now. So once you get a complete hands-on and you become a bit more comfortable on AWS, then you can switch to JSON. But let's try. Let's not feel shy on using visual. So let's start using visual and just click S3. So this will give all the S3 actions that you can allow to a particular user. So this is how fine-grained you can select your options when you are creating a policy. So if you select all S3 actions, you will be given full S3 permissions, but my intention is not that. I just want to provide, like for example, list bucket. Okay, I only want to list bucket and list all my buckets, only those options, and I want to give him all read actions. Let him read everything, or let the user read everything on the bucket, but I don't want to give any write options, permission management, tagging, or anything. In the all the list actions, let me give all the list actions even. So this list and read are related to a read purpose, so I'm just giving only this access, and I want to give for all resources. Okay, so for all resources, for all the buckets, I can list and read, but I cannot write anything. So let's see, will this be able to show my S3 buckets which already present in this. Okay, if you see, if you want to verify, if you click on this S3 bucket, this is my admin user. So if you click on this, if you see, there should be already couple of S3 buckets that we have created as a part of our testings earlier. So some Elastic Beanstalk which have created, like GitHub, and DevOps training which we have created as a part of earlier session. So there are 3 buckets already existing, but there is nothing over here. I'm sorry. So there is nothing over here because it doesn't mean that there are no buckets in this account or in this region, but that you don't have access to that. So now what I'm doing is I'm just giving the relevant permissions. Even you can click on JSON to see how this has written it. So it has written in such a way that this is a statement. So this is version is default, and after version you are going to write the list of statements. So this is a list of statements you are going to make, and each and every statement, SID is nothing but the statement identifier. You can make it any identifier, like policy 1 or visual. It makes as a visual editor, but you can just make it anything. Let me policy 1, and effect is allow. Always create an options to allow, or you can also have an options to deny, but let's only focus on how to affect and or how to give an option of allow. And these are all the S3 actions I am giving. S3 action is nothing but action in AWS is nothing but an event or an operation that you make on AWS. Listing a bucket, creating an instance, deleting an instance, or uploading an object, everything has an action on AWS defined to it. So you need to select that particular action, and you need to give the read or write or list actions like this. So all these actions access have given to the particular policy for all the resources of S3. Okay, so now let me again go back to visual and just quickly review this. Okay, list read permissions are given to all the resources. So let me click on next, and let me give this policy as read S3 policy. Okay, so no need of description for now. I'll just create a policy. So read S3 policy has been created. This policy has been created, but I haven't attached it to the user. Let me get back to the user. Click on the user, get into the permissions, add permissions. Again, get to attach policies directly. So start typing read S3 policy. Select this. Click on next. Add permissions. So once you added the permissions, without any delay, if I refresh this, they should show the necessary buckets or whatever the buckets that are present over here. Okay, so you should be able to see now it's showing as 3 buckets. So there's also showing like whatever the buckets or some informations that are present. I'm able to skim through it, get into under it. Now let me try. Now I've said like I have only given the read access. Let me try if I'm able to upload something or not. Let me add some files. Let me get into the downloads and add some kind of some png file. Click on open, just upload. Let me see if I'm able to do that. Okay, it says okay, it says upload fails, view details below. Okay, so let me check. If you see on the files and folders, it says that status has failed, error is access denied. You don't have permissions to upload files and folders. This is why you are not able to upload. If you want this person to have the access, attach that particular policy onto this, and then you will be able to do that. So I'll be giving this as an assignment, but This is how generally permissions and accesses works. This is for the users. You can utilize the existing AWS policies like this, or you can write the custom policies also. So roles is a little bit different. So let me come back to the role now. So roles is where we utilize for the services. So to demonstrate this, let's have an EC2 instance get created. Before that, let's have the user. Like if you get into this particular user and click on this user and get into the security credentials tab. If you get into the security credentials tab, you have this console link and all. At the similar fashion, you also have the access keys. So this access keys are responsible for, what do you say, accessing the AWS management console via CLI. Okay, as we seen in the earlier PPT, we have seen that we can able to access the AWS via CLI using this. But before that, let's cover this roles. Let's understand how we are going to what do you say, access our services, access this AWS services, access another AWS services via role. Then we can jump into downloading this what do you say, AWS CLI via the browser. We'll download that CLI tool, and then we'll install it locally and then try to connect to it. So to do that, let's launch an EC2 instance. So my use case is simple. I want to access S3 bucket using EC2. Okay, so let me check like how can do that. So on an EC2 instance, let us say my application is running and I want to utilize the S3 bucket. So I want to launch an EC2 instance. Let me quickly launch my EC2 instance. My AWS instance or the EC2 instance, pretty much simple as we discussed earlier. So I'm providing some IAM demo name. I've provided some AMI ID. So then I've selected the T2 micro, key pair, my first key pair and all. Just provided some default details and hit on launch instance. So it takes a couple of minutes for getting the launching the instance. Okay, so it's saying the launch has been initiated and it has successfully launched. Let me click on the instances, and if I can refresh, I can see an instance that got created. Let me click on this. It should be very soon, or should be coming into the running state. It shouldn't take much time, so it should be very sooner. So in the meantime, let's me get into this thing. Once this is available and instance state is running, then you will be able to connect to it. So now the instance state is running. It just took a minute or something for get to available. So let me click on connect. Okay, and I'll be using EC2 instance connect. So for connecting, I've just clicked connect. But let us say, think a scenario, your EC2 instance or your application present on the EC2 instance want to access another AWS service like S3. I'm sorry. So like S3. So what do you do? Generally do is we use AWS CLI commands. So this AWS CLI commands are very much important when you are trying to or understanding, what do you say, AWS via the application level. For example, your application is a Java based application or some kind of Python based applications, or a shell script. If you are running a shell script, then you need to execute some AWS shell commands or Linux shell commands to connect to AWS and execute something, correct? So this command line interface plays a major role for having that what is a kind of interaction. You cannot have a always have a GUI interface for connecting to AWS. Rather, this command line will help you. So this AWS CLI reference is something that we need to always catch hold of it. You can get into this AWS CLI reference for any kind of stuff. Like for example, if you want to use this for accessing S3, for accessing any other stuff. But before that, let me, as we connected to AWS instance, so let me switch to root user. And if you see, and if you just to type AWS CLI version, even you can just check it. Like for example, I want to get into S3. In the search box, you can search with S3. It will give you the commands related to S3. or else we can directly get into Google and say AWS S3 command line reference. So this will give you the AWS S3 CLI command line reference module, and using that you will have the CLI commands that will be executed. Okay, but before that you can also check the AWS CLI version by AWS space hyphen hyphen version. Okay, this gives AWS CLI version that is present on your Linux machine. This AWS CLI is pre-installed and pre-configured on the EC2 instance by the time it is getting launched. Okay, so let us say, for example, let's quickly jump into this available examples like SP, LS, MB. So let me get into a CP command, or let me get into an LS command, which is more easy. Okay, so ls says that list s3 objects and common prefixes under a prefix of or all s3 buckets. So this ls command is nothing but it's like a view command that you see on s3 bucket. Like even if you go to drop down, you can see an example like aws space s3 space ls that we seen in the ppt. So this aws s3 space ls will list all the bucket that is present in that aws account. Okay, so let me do that. So aws space s3 space ls. If you see unable to locate credentials, you can configure by running aws configure. So on the aws ec2 account, you need not to do an aws configure or provide any access keys, secret ids, or do any mechanism. So this can be done via an instance role. So that's why we have an option to attach an instance role, because it's unable to locate any such credentials. So for that, what we generally do is, if you get into the instance under security, you will be having an option for an IAM role. So this IAM role is what which I was saying, which is responsible for an service to interact with other AWS service. Okay, so let me get into this, what do you say, IAM. So let me open this in a new tab. So now what my agenda is, I want to create an IAM role for EC2 instance to access S3 bucket. So I'll get into the role. Okay, so now I'm taking a very much simple use cases team. So but when we get into the real-time use cases, when we start actual use cases executions, and when we actually start that particular sessions, I'm going to use a lot of options on IAM and a lot of options on AWS, where we are going to utilize more and more complexity on IAMs and more complexity on the rules and everything. But for now, let's understand that EC2 instance is trying to AWS access AWS S3. So let's create a role. So I trusted entity type is nothing but who is going to actually assume this role or use this role. So that is called trusted entity type. So this is like and one AWS service will be using this role to access another AWS service. So you need to select this. There is also options like you can use another AWS account can also use this role. A web identity can use this role. SAML federation or custom trust policy. We will see this when we get into API gateways, when we get into CloudFront, when we get into cross account access, when we do such use cases. But let's select AWS service for now and show a service or use case. In this, select EC2 because I want to create a role for EC2. After this, just click next, and in this I want to give a S3 access. So let us say for now, to keep it simple, I'm just using the existing policy provided by AWS rather than creating my custom policy. I'm creating and I'm providing S3 full access and just clicking next. So once you click next, this I'm just giving demo instance profile. So we call this role as nothing but a instance profile. Okay, so that's why it says that allow EC2 instances to call AWS services on your behalf. So this is the permission. This is a trust policy. We are saying that please assume this role for the principle of ec2.amazonaws.com. In this principle is nothing but who is going to assume this role, or nothing but who is going to utilize this role is the principle, and what action is going to do is nothing but assuming this role. So next, let's click on create role. So this demo instance profile has been successfully created. Now my next task is to attach it to the instance, because in this I am not able to see anything. So now I am going to attach it. So for this you can just go to the top, sorry, click on instance, click on actions, get to security and modify IAM role, and in this you can just select demo instance profile and update IAM role. So if you get into the instance now and click on the security details, you can see, sorry, security details, you can see demo instance profile. Now let me get into the EC2 console, I mean to say the connect, and just click AWS S3 LS. If you see, now I can see the S3 buckets, whatever the 3 buckets that are present. So this is how you can delegate the access to one of the AWS service to access another AWS service via the role. So this is a very simple explanation how one service utilize the other service accesses using policy attached to a role. So there can be n number of services on AWS, but the basic fundamental behind that is if one service wants to access another service, service A wants to access service B, service A should have the right policy attached to its role, should to access service B. It doesn't mean that service B can access service A if service A has the policy. There is should be another role for service B, and there should be another policy for it, or the same policy attached to it, or that particular condition written on it. So this is not a to and fro communication we are making. It's a single one-way communication we are making from one service to other service by providing a role to that particular service by attaching certain policies with the relevant level of access based on the least access privilege method or least access privilege criteria. So this is how generally the role works. In the similar fashion, this I've seen this here. I've shown you the command line connectivity or using a command line CLI command to AWS using on EC2, but you can also do it from the AWS as well, from your local as well. To do that, firstly, let's try downloading the AWS CLI on your local laptop. So let me do is AWS CLI download. If you click that, you will get this installer update the latest version of AWS CLI. So you can check it. So once you have that available, you can scroll down a little bit and you can select the respective operating system of yours. So mine is Mac OS, I'm just selecting it. So I'll be selecting a GUI installer. You can select a command line or command line users, but I'll be selecting a GUI installer so that it will be easy for selecting the options. You can just click this one and it starts downloads. So it takes a couple of seconds for getting the download. Okay, so my download is ready. So let me use this. I'm just going into that particular folder. So I'm trying to access this. So this is pretty much for Mac OS, but if you're doing on Windows, it's same like a .exe that will be asking for you, and you can select the options and add it to the path variable. Okay, I'll try to use a Windows laptop to demo this, but it's pretty much simple like downloading a tool and adding it. So I'm just selecting this things and just installing on the location, a default location. I'm just providing my password and configuring and validating the packages. It will take a couple of minutes for this, or it might be a couple of seconds. Okay, so my installation was successful. It took around like 4 to 5 minutes for me for installing, so I have stopped the video and come back again. So now my installation is successful. Let me close this and just come back to my command line and just start typing AWS space hyphen hyphen version. So now I should see the AWS CLI like this. If you're not seeing this, try to copy or try to symlink your library to the bin folder or add this particular path like which AWS. You can get the path of your AWS CLI and you can copy it to your particular path. If you are on Windows, copy it into your environment variable or copy it into your path, and so that you will be able to access this. Okay, most probably by installing this from the GUI package, it should be automatically set, but there can be cases where you want to where you are not able to access this. Okay, if you're still stuck on the issues, you can hit me on the GitHub page on the discussion forum. I'll be able to answer that. Okay, so now we have an AWS CLI. So now how we are going to connect this to your AWS account, correct? So for that we need to have some credentials, right? So to do that, what we need to do is, we have already created the user, correct? So this user, so let me get into the user on the IAM, get into users. This user, you need to click on security credentials, get into create access keys. So I want to use the command line interface. Okay, so I understand the correct recommendation and click next, select the command line interface and click next. Okay, so no need of the tag value for now, you can just create the access key. So this access key you need to copy it somewhere, or let me get into this. To set up your CLI, the command for that is AWS configure, or you can get all those things. If you want, you can get it on the command line reference or this particular documentation. In the command line reference, everything will be present. So I have already done it earlier. So I remember this command AWS configure. If you press this, it will ask for AWS access key ID is nothing but this one, AWS access key. So let me copy it to this and enter, and it will ask for a secret key. So I'll copy and I'll enter the secret key. So default region, you can keep it as US East 1. So I'll be deleting this user, so don't worry if this access key ID and secret IDs are visible to everyone. So I'll be deleting this user post this call, so no one will be able to access this AWS account with the keys. So it will be US East 1, the default region, or you can select any default regions, but most of the infrastructures are being built on US East 1. So I'll just keep it as the default as this, and the default output format as of now you can keep it as none. So it will be a JSON format where you will be retrieving your outputs. So press enter. So now you can have your CLI has been connected to this AWS account, which is nothing but this. Okay, so now let me you already know that you are on this user Manish AWS DevOps demo, because the security credentials has been created to this, to that particular user. Let me check the same AWS S3 LS commands will work on this or not, for this particular user or not. So AWS S3 space LS. Okay, so I've just typed it and let me see. It should list. Wow, so it listed the AWS S3 buckets which are currently available on this. Okay, so let me copy, like for example, assignment dot ipynb. Let me copy it to the S3 bucket, S3 AWS. So command for this is, I might be using the command because I've used it earlier. If you don't know the command, you can start typing like AWS S3 CLI command line reference. Click on this and what action you want to do. So I want to copy a particular file. So for that, what should be used? So copy commands perform what are the operations. So for example, if you scroll down a little bit, you can see a cp is the command for that. If you still want to more reference for that, you can get into one by one cp, and if you click on that cp, you will be having a detailed explanation on what all the things you need to give. You need to give a local path, s3 uri, or s3 uri local path, or s3 uri and s3 uri. It says that from local, if you want to copy to s3, this is the stuff, or from s3 if you want to copy into another, from s3 if you want to download to your local, this is the path, and from s3 if you want to download to another s3, this is the path. But for now I'm trying to do an upload operation. So according to our understanding, we are not having option to upload, right? So it should get failed because we already tried to upload. So let's try if we are able to get it from CLI also. AWS space s3 space assignment. I'm just copying this assignment file to If you don't know what is an S3 URI, get into an S3 bucket, click on S3 bucket, and if you click on the properties on this, you can get your S3 URI. Like for example, if you get into index.html file, so this is the S3 URI is nothing but the relative path. So from this you can only take it till here. So let me take it only till here so that I can copy it to this particular folder. Okay, and just try to press enter. So my assumption is it shouldn't go, but let's see if that goes. It says that upload failed, stating that an error occurred, access denied when calling the put object operation. So this says that I am not having access to put an object. Let me see if I can have an access to place an or download an object. So let me see AWS space S3 space CP space dot. This says it can download to my local. Let me check if I'm having that access or not. So if it's downloads, we should have an access. So it says yes, there are no errors for this. So let me do a cat, or I'm sorry, I haven't downloaded it, so my bad. So I'm just giving an index.html. So I'm just downloading this file to my local, just space dot. So I'm downloading this index.html file into my local. So this should give me about what happened when we tried to download this particular file from AWS into my local. Okay, so it says download s3 to .index.html, so it did not show any error. So let me cat the content of this. So cat, so this is what we have uploaded into this, right? So I'm able to download this, but I'm not able to upload because I did not put the permissions of it. So this is how generally the IAM users work, access roles works and all. We are going to extensively use IAM when we are dealing with most of the services. So try to catch hold of the whatever the stuffs we are having on IAM and how we are going to access that and all, because this is something what we are going to see in much more detail when we get into the other AWS services. Post this, we are going to see some stuff on Elastic Beanstalk and AWS Lambda. So when we get into that, the service roles comes in. So I thought of giving this lecture before earlier so that you can catch hold of what is an IAM, what is a CLI. So start giving you a hands-on and getting your things on. Start downloading a AWS CLI onto your local. Do some operations from your local so that it will be much more easier when you ask you to write a shell script to do some operations, or ask you to write a schedule, or ask you to write some automation scripts to do some day-to-day activities. So that's how AWS CLI will be much more useful when you come into the actual real-time use cases. Okay, so that's all for today. So but for on the next session, we'll be much more discussing on Elastic Beanstalk and some serverless architectures like Lambda and SES, simple email service, and simple notification service. We are going to see how this application level services can be integrated, and post that we are going to jump into databases. So these are some things that we are going to discuss in detail, but this will take a couple of 1 to 2 weeks. Post that we are going to see some kind of DevOps introduction, and then we will be jumping into actual DevOps series where we are going to utilize all these services extensively and build some robust architecture for DevOps. Okay, so thank you all. Thanks for joining. Hope all have a great day, and we'll connect in the next call. Thank you so much.